What's going on, guys? Coach Pat here, followed by Coach Troy from Inspired. So today, myself and Troy are going to be doing a team part series over the next few months, essentially talking or breaking down different styles of team training that we can do. So how to optimally perform within the weight room. Okay, so our first video we're going to be looking at is going to be for hockey. A lot of our clientele here at Inspired are high-level hockey players, so we thought by tackling this first on would be great. So essentially we're going to look at the demands of the sport. So demands of sport for hockey. We're also going to get into different types of testing that we can do with these athletes, okay? We're also going to break down what a full year macro cycle would look like. So what a full years of training would look like for these athletes, okay? We're also going to break down each of these blocks and how this is going to look, as well as we're going to look at how we can train for those athletes' strengths as well as their weaknesses. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright guys, so looking at the demands of the sport for these athletes, so looking at a work to rest ratio for these athletes, you're looking at a work length from anywhere from 30 to 90 seconds.
Yeah, so it's really important to understand, guys, that the harder you skate out there, then of course that means the less time you can spend out there. Any of you that have kind of got caught out at the different end of the ice, not close enough to your bench, have realized just how important it is to shorten up those shifts if you are skating really, really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And then looking at that rest up to anywhere from about 5 minutes.
Yeah, so again, we're looking at, from first to, line 1 to line 4. If you're on the fourth line, then you're probably going to have much more rest than a first liner, just because they'll have a tendency to be out there more often.
Okay, so looking at the high max oxygen uptake, also known as the VO2 max for these athletes.
Yeah, so that's, you're going to see we're going to go through the testing for this down the road, but guys, it is unreal. Some of the NHL athletes and their amount and how high some of these numbers are, it's going to blow your minds, and we'll show you how you can kind of test for that on your own as well.
Alright guys, so next looking at the high power demands for these athletes. So this is where we look at acceleration and deceleration. So if you take an athlete like Connor McDavid, for example, he does a really good job at creating space because he's able to accelerate, but more importantly, he's able to decelerate at a faster rate than most individuals. So if we're able to accelerate and then essentially decelerate at a faster rate, we're going to be able to create more distance over time, which is essentially going to allow that athlete to create more space.
Right, so just to think, to catch half a stride on someone, let alone a full stride, is so important, and seeing someone like McDavid do it at the highest level. It's not just straight line speed, although he is the fastest guy in the NHL, but it's the ability to create space, like Pat said, which is much more valuable in most situations when it comes to hockey, because most of the time you don't get a straight shot at anything when it comes to that 200 feet of ice.
Yeah, absolutely. And then looking at that hand-eye coordination, very important for these athletes. So Troy, if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys have ever tried, maybe go to a batting cage and safely and try to just tip that ball into where you want to hit the back of the fence. So think about that with 8 other people in front of you, and somebody taking a shot at close to 100 miles an hour a lot and putting it into the back of a net with a goalie standing in the way. That's how crazy hard and how the level of hand-eye coordination that some of these guys have.
Mm-hmm. So talking about space and distance, guys, we're looking at anywhere from 6 to 10 shifts per period for these athletes. They're essentially covering anywhere from 2.3 to 6.7 kilometers per game, which is a great amount of distance. Troy, if you want to elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, so again, we have to go back to first to fourth liners. Of course, they're going to cover less ground, but also I think of the positional demands, which you're going to hear us say that probably over and over again in this series of videos, and pretty much any team videos. So from 2.3 to 6.7 kilometers covered, like Pat said, that can be a lot of distance, but typically we see forwards will cover less distance but travel at a faster rate of speed, and defensemen will kind of not move as fast but cover a greater distance.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where we have to look in the weight room as well too. It is important to look at the positional demands of those athletes, right? So we may have to, in the weight room as well, have a little bit of a different focus for that athlete depending on their position. Lastly as well, we're going to look at the amount of sprints those athletes are actually doing within the game. So we're looking at essentially 7 15-minute sprints within a minute. So meters.
That's okay, guys. So what we're looking here now, what I want you to try to do, of course we can't complete this on a track. If you try to run 7 15-meter sprints on a track, you're going to die. But on ice, it's much different because you're gliding quite a bit throughout those strides. You take a few strides and you'll probably cover that 15 meters, so within that minute of time. So if you're wondering where we got a lot of this information from, was from a study done from a group in Sweden, which did cover a great deal of this at great length. All right, guys, so what we have here are typical player sizes in different leagues of the sport, and also the differences in some of the power outputs, because hockey is a very power dominant sport. So it's not like you're running a long distance marathon or anything like that. You're traveling at a really high rate of speed very, very frequently. So the average NHL versus NCAA player, we're looking at 186 centimeters versus 183 centimeters. It's only like about an inch difference. But here we see a much bigger difference here. So we're looking at a weight of 92 to 85 kilos.
So essentially, yeah, so you're getting a 7 kg discrepancy between the two guys. So that's over 14 pounds. So it is quite a big difference here. Also looking at these outputs as well, we're going to be looking at average VO2 max for these athletes. So it's anywhere from 53 to 60 milliliters per kg per minute. Okay. Also looking at an average CMJ, so counter movement jump. So we can test this on a vert mass or off the jump. There's many different ways that we can actually test this, but we're looking anywhere from 40 to 60 centimeters. Okay. Troy, if you want to elaborate a little bit on the max power.
Yeah, so what we're looking at, so think about, we do these tests typically done on bikes, and we can also get this done through other means that aren't nearly as accurate. A lot of times in team environments, it's tested, especially this in particular, is tested doing things like a beep test or something like that. Again, we'll talk about that down the road, but just to kind of give you an idea. When we think about these, typically they're done on a bike. We use a Concept 2 bike, works great for it, and there's watt bikes and that kind of stuff. But so to see this kind of high max power output, so we're looking at 897 watts to 1675 watts of max power output. So typically we get this within about 10 seconds and then the power drops off. But just think of how powerful that is to think about we're getting how high are those readings. And also the average power, so that means it's typically about done in 30-second intervals of an average power of almost 54 watts. To think of that kind of output, you can see the demands of the sport. And just to kind of give yourself a chance, if you do have a bike like that, if you don't have a bike like that, let us know. We'll try to see if we can find another formula for you to use and see how you can compare to these totals.
Perfect. All right, guys, so looking at different types of tests that we can do for these athletes. So essentially, if we're looking to test any type of horizontal or vertical power, we can do what's called a broad jump and a counter movement jump. So like I mentioned before, we could use like an opta jump or a vert mat to test that counter movement jump. As well as the broad jump, we can just essentially measure the distance across the board there. So looking at the wing gait as well, we can look at the average average wattage as well as the max wattage produced for these athletes. So like Troy had mentioned, we could do this on what we use as a Concept 2 bikes. There's different type of equipment that we can use for this as well. So looking at a couple different lifts that we can do in the weight room. So first we can look at the squat, the bench, as well as pull-ups. We can also get into like a mid-thigh isometric pull. Essentially, if Troy, you want to elaborate a little bit on that. So.
Yeah, so with kind of what Pat is talking about, there's some of these, actually most of them are really subjective because it is off-ice testing. So we just have to understand that. But what we can do is get the numbers and kind of see how typical players score on these off-ice tests. And we can get a pretty good idea, given their skill set, if they're going to compare and how well they're going to do off-ice. And we can just get a marker of where they are now and see how we can improve and what we need to improve on. So things like Pro Agility, it's great for acceleration and deceleration, but again, it's off ice. But typically people that are really good at this on ice, are going to be probably good at it on ice as well, just because that's like a natural tendency. If you're good at something, if you change the environment, you should still be kind of good at it. And when it comes to any of these, especially the squat, bench, and the pull-up, it's very, very subjective on how it translates into the game. But I feel really strongly that if someone is stronger, that they'll probably maybe not get as hurt as often as we've seen with our athletes here. One of the best ways that we can test strength, and it's very simple, it's simple to set up and very fast and efficient. So if you're testing teams, you don't even have to go through some of these. That mid-thigh isometric pull is basically using a crane scale and having a bar at mid-thigh, and you pull as hard as you can, and you use a crane scale to measure the amount of output that the athlete has. So it's really, really valuable information. If they can output, say, 2.5 times their body weight, then we know that they should be strong enough for the demands of their sport. It's not a test that's done on the NHL at the NHL level, but we do see it in the UFC, and it's a good crossover test to be able to use with some of our athletes as well.
Absolutely. Kind of just elaborating on that as well. So it also gives us a good baseline to work from as well, right? So if we look at the beginning of the off season for that athlete, if we have these numbers, we can see over time if that athlete actually is improving, and then we're able to report back to the coach.
Absolutely, and then one of the most subjective tests that we see all the time is the beep test. It's really unfortunate. I understand the need to test athletes, of course, especially in a group setting. But the issue with the beep test is that if someone isn't a very good runner, it's not going to translate well to testing their VO2 max. So again, if the world was perfect and we can have portable VO2 max testing units, we get them on the ice and we can see kind of what they really are. But I totally understand the need to test in a group setting. But all you athletes out there, it's your responsibility, if you know that there's going to be a beep test, to get more efficient at running so you can get a better score at it. So not just kind of run and just pound the pavement, so to speak, it's to become really efficient at that beep test so you can get a true score for what you're really testing.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Also, guys, we can look at testing or just looking at the height, the weight, and the body fat of that athlete. So this is actually really important for younger groups as well. So if you have a younger team, you're going to have athletes going through puberty. They're going to have different changes in their body. So that's where that height and weight is going to come into play. Also looking at body fat percentage. And we can even look at the higher level as well. If a coach reports back that an athlete does need to be at a certain weight, we can also monitor that as well. So
yeah, for sure. And again, it's really subjective on how this translates, but every coach is different.
Right, exactly. So,
a guy like Dustin Byfuglien made a career at almost 200 or around 260 pounds, when most athletes in hockey could never even skate at that kind of weight. So again, it's just to see where someone is at as a good marker, an indication of where they are now and where we need to maybe make some improvements.
Exactly, yeah. And like Troy said, it is subjective. Not necessarily that it's going to carry over to their sport, but it does give us a good baseline to work from. So, awesome.